Hello and welcome to PSG Review, the show busy with the early autumn, late summer even as it happened, and now once more we have an international break. Perhaps the least needed break for club football, this one that comes only after 3 rounds of football, but there's a lot to talk about and I'm joined by someone who has some serious first-hand experience on professional sports.
You are listening to PSG Review. Here's your host, Mikko.
Great to have you with me. A lot on the agenda this week because since the last episode of PSG Review, the transfer window has ended. It has closed for the summer of 2024. The Champions League has new format and the draw for what is now known as league phase. Previously it was group stage, but of course now a new system. The draw for that took place and no points for guessing who got statistically the toughest draw on the continent. It could only be us. And PSG finished the match day 3 of Ligue 1 in the north of France playing against Lille at Stade Pierre-Mauroy, the venue that mere month ago was hosting a whole different types of athletes including Victor Wembanyama and LeBron James, people like that. That's where the Olympic basketball was being played. I'm still figuring out how the transformation of the stadium into an indoor arena went, but there you have it. It's not like I have tried to figure it out. On top of that, PSG women's team went to Perth, Australia to win their first few matches there. Pre-season friendly tournament as it was played. They played against West Ham and Manchester City, 2 wins and 2 clean sheets. But I promise that I'm not here by myself today. With me is Mike McNally. Mike is someone I've been talking a lot with in recent times on Twitter, and he has quite a good sense of how professional sports works since he has worked on that field there in North America on a very high level, actually. Basically witnessing the process not just from what sometimes is called the Spike Lee tickets and the front row, but also even beyond that, inside these structures of sports structures. To me, that type of insight is very fascinating because for many of us fans, we're sort of left to imagine what it might be like to be inside there, the pressures and the humanity in all of its variations. Thanks, Mike, for joining me on PSG Review. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here with you.
That's really great. We have a lot to cover. There's a lot of stuff that has been happening. It's been quite a busy week and the summer and everything else. But let's start off with the Champions League in the league phase as it is known now, which replaced the group stage. PSG will play against 8 different teams, 4 home and 4 away. And according to Opta analysts, the average rating of opponents is the highest for us in the whole competition. That sounds about right. And let me run through the schedule. We are on 18th of September. We are playing at home against Girona. Arsenal, 1st of October in London. Again at Parc des Princes, 22nd of October. PSV Eindhoven, 6th of November. Atletico Madrid at Parc des Princes. 26th November, Bayern Munich in Germany. 10th of December, Salzburg in Austria. 22nd of January, this is in a new year, 2025. We are playing Manchester City at Parc des Princes, and 29th of January we are in Stuttgart playing against them. 8 matches instead of early December as they used to end, they run all the way to the end of January. There are matches where we are favorites and others where we might not be the favorites, but all of them are somehow winnable. I think not easy. Don't get me wrong, not easy by a long shot, but not impossible. What do you reckon about this selection of teams that we're going to be playing?
It is indeed tough on paper. When we look at it, when it first came out, we could all see, like when we pulled Bayern and Man City right off the top, that this is typical PSG draw. I caution a little bit when I look at draws like this because obviously as the year goes on, we don't know where their fixtures fall. What's Arsenal playing before? Who's Arsenal playing after? I've kind of looked at ours, and in a lot of cases, it is going to be even more difficult for us in terms of where those fall. I will say I'm excited about this format. I'm excited for what it is for the fans. To play 8 different opponents, to go to 4 different places, it's just, it brings different variety. We're going to see some different opponents. And we're going into it with a young team. And so with a young team, you don't know what you don't know. So I'm kind of optimistic in terms of what Lucho's going to do with this and how he's going to frame that. So overall, yes, it's a very, very tough draw. how we finish. I mean, obviously, I've seen people speculate all the way from, being up in that top 8 to, to people who say we'll struggle to qualify. I was looking at a site online, and I had sent this over to the link, and it's a site on Twitter called Football Meets Data. And they talked and analyzed that 9 points get you in the top 24, 15 points would get you in the top 8. So when you look at our group, or our schedule, I should say, not our group, I think it's very reasonable, that we're 15 points plus. I don't think that's unreasonable to look at. I mean, I think we've got the advantage of the home games being against the teams I would probably want to face at home. Sure, going to Bayern is not great, but I don't think this is the Bayern of old. I think sometimes we see a name on a piece of paper, like, oh my gosh, it's Bayern all over again, and we're seeing UCL final flashbacks. I don't think Bayern's the team of old. I don't fear them as much. So pulling them on the road of that group makes sense to me, or it's beneficial, I think, to us. Whereas now we're pulling Man City here. We get them at the Parc des Princes. So I actually kind of like the way it fell out. I like the way it structures itself out. So I'm cautiously optimistic. But what I am is I'm very excited for the format, even though there's some wrinkles in there that I don't know if the fans have really dug into, in terms of we have to set our rosters tomorrow on September 3rd. So we have to submit our rosters there. And then this is the team that we have through the league phase. There is no changing this. And even though we'll see a transfer window coming into play on January 1, this is the team that we have through the 8 matches. It's again on February 6th for our fans that may not be aware of some of how the inner workings work. On February 6th, we can then introduce 3 new players to our roster. So if we make some changes in that January window, then we could introduce those 3 players to our roster, but that wouldn't be applied until we get to the knockout phase.
Okay, that's very interesting. Actually, I hadn't really thought about that, but that is true, because now these matches, like I said, we're still having 22nd of January and 29th of January, so pretty much going all the way to the end of January. But even if we would get somebody on the 1st of January, that is not, they are not going to be available for these matches. Yeah, okay, that's a very good distinction that I hadn't really thought about too much, but that's very good to know. I also think that's very true what you're saying about, especially like Bayern Munich. We are playing them on November, towards the end of November. In somehow that could have been a good match to play even earlier than that, because they have a new coach and they've had some changes there also. Of course, they will always be, you never go to play against Bayern Munich with too much arrogance. They are always going to be a very tough team, but it is absolutely true. They are not. It's not that team that it has been before. So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah, even Manchester City, they are not. Of course, they're a great team. Nobody's questioning that. But I don't think that there is any team there that couldn't be won. And at the same time, I was kind of approaching this in a way that, not necessarily saying that we will get full points against those 4 teams like Girona and Eindhoven and Stuttgart and Salzburg. I'm not saying that we'll definitely get. I'm saying that I think that we have to have the ambition to try and get that. Of course, accident can happen. Some match can be a draw. Some match can be even defeat. But I do think that 15 points you said, yes, you were referring to that calculation that they had made, and 15 points. I would say that that would according to plus minus more or less, that would help you to be in the top 8, go directly into the round of 16 then. So I think that's doable, and I think that if we don't get around that 9 points, which is basically winning 3 matches out of 8, then I don't really think that we have a place to go to the knockouts. I think we have to sit that one out then, because you have to be realistic as well. I think there's also something that it is true that you were saying, that it's a new system and we're going to have 8 matches, 8 different opponents, which is quite nice. I didn't particularly have a problem with the old group stage, but clearly this has got some advantages, and it's no wonder that we, for instance, we are playing, I think for the first time, really a competitive match. We played some preseason friendly, but competitive match against, for instance, Atletico Madrid. It's just never happened really before, as far as I understand. But there's a lot of matches, and then if you are not on the top 8, then you play 2-legged qualifying round also to get there. So then that's already 10 matches. And usually the knockouts, the round of 16 starts around Valentine's Day, 14th of February. Now I'm not quite sure actually what is going to be the estimated starting date of them, but this is going to be a long season with a lot of matches. How do you reckon? You also have your own experience from sports, professional and otherwise. What's the psychological requirement, let's say, for the players to play this many more matches? The injuries that can, in all fairness, happen even if there are fewer matches. But how does an athlete approach something like this?
You are correct in the additional matches. I think one thing we have to point out is Ligue 1's moved to 18 clubs a couple of years ago. That's 4 matches off our schedule. And one of the things, at least that I had read, was the league was kind of trying to gear that towards being more competitive in European matches. So this year, for example, we don't have any midweek Liga matches. And I think last year we had one. And that was, I think, right before the Christmas holiday break. So as we approach this, and yes, you are right, it goes into it's into March is when we actually start the round of 16. I think February is those qualifying games. Really, where this is going to come down to more so than our athletes, it's going to come down to Lucho. I mean, because players want to play, right? They're going to want to be in the matches. Where it's going to come down to is his management of minutes and how he's managing these minutes for these guys throughout the year. And then also factoring in, these international breaks that kind of jump in the middle of things as well. And I think we have 2 that we'll see before we get to these knockout stages. So as a player, like I said, they're going to want to play, but from Lucho's standpoint, and I think this is where some of that versatility that he's talking about with this roster is coming into play, where we're going to see some guys maybe playing in some different roles and some different positions, and that's great to see. I mean, we had a guy like Doué, he can play in that forward area. He can also kind of play in that midfield area as well. So we're certainly going to have to see the management up there. But I do think Liga and the LFP has put us in an advantage by going down to those 18 teams. We have that competition, and then we have the Coupe de France that will be going on. When you look over in England, for example, I can't even keep track of the number of competitions that seem to be going on over there. And we always talk about the congestion in the schedules, or at least the coaches over there are talking about. So I like where our roster stands. I'm not too concerned about the extra matches, to be honest. I think we'll be fine. Obviously, the injuries, we can't ever plan for that. I mean, that stuff comes out of the blue, and when it happens, it happens. You just got to adjust and deal with it. I mean, sure, we could talk about our rosters and maybe some of the concern of to where that roster is right now after the transfer window. But I think we have the versatility of this team to manage this, at least obviously getting through this league phase. And then we have an opportunity to address some changes as we get into the knockouts.
And then at the time already, I think we should be expecting, for instance, Gonzalo Ramos should be back. I think he could be back around late November. Then, of course, it's difficult. It's one thing to be back, but it's another thing to be in form and ready to really play big matches. But I mean, these are professional athletes, and we've already seen some images. He's been there on the gym, and he's already like lifting weights with his legs also, and working the whole body. So it's not too bad. But we are currently in a little bit of a tricky situation in that sense that it almost feels like, in a manner of speaking, that our injury sort of quota is full already. Like, we have 3 serious injuries at the moment. Gonzalo Ramos, like, yes, he's going to be back. Difficult to say about Kimpembe. That's a whole question mark about his return. Will it even ever happen? We start wondering, because that's how it's been going, and there's been relapse after relapse after relapse, it feels, and even after he already was absent for a long time, and then there was an operation, so it kind of signaled that something had gone a bit wrong, that operation hadn't happened before, and then of course Lucas Hernandez. He had an injury history when he came to Paris, and I was a little bit concerned about that when he did. But his first season was really great. I really enjoyed watching him. I think he was an exceptional player and really great influence on the pitch last season. But then, just as we went behind to Borussia Dortmund in that semi-final. And I said, when watching that match with our local fan club here, I said that this might be more of a problem. The injury might be more of a problem than the goal. Well, as it turned out, both were a problem, but we are still paying for that injury. So we really hope that there's not going to be more injuries, not too much fatigue. For instance, last season, I remember Manuel Ugarte, who now has moved on, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but he had such a great beginning for the season, but those international breaks that the South Americans, they travel, they're playing in high altitudes. Ecuador, where William Pache is from, is essentially high altitude and things like that. Well, hopefully he's used to it then. But nevertheless, these are very taxing trips that they're doing during these international breaks. So we really have to hope for the best when it comes to that.
Yeah, and talking about our injuries, and so my days, as you mentioned, I worked in Major League Baseball here, so your North American viewers will be obviously very familiar with that sport. You do have players that take those rehabs obviously more serious than others. I mean, there's some that are, I recall some that are just bulldogs, and they're just going to get back as quick as possible. And when I look at Lucas Hernandez, and as you mentioned, he's had a history of some injuries, but we also see a history of him coming all the way back and coming back into very top form. So with Lucas, I don't have a question that he will come back in top form because we've seen it. There's a history that's there with him. So when we talk about, not being able to add a person to this league phase, right? Well, we can add Lucas Hernandez to the mix. And when you look at a guy like Gonzalo Ramos, and obviously he's a younger player, to me, and I'm a big Gonzalo Ramos fan. I'm so happy that the club did what they did in this transfer window, because I still believe when he comes back, I still think this guy is going to be great for us. But what I also see from him is a guy that I would have full trust in doing everything he does to work out to get back at that top level. So those two pieces, I feel very, very good about. Unfortunately, in Kimpembe's case, that setback, it makes you nervous. It makes you nervous about what's happening there, what's going to happen with his career. And this is a guy that has worn our colors and represented this club as well as anybody could ever ask for. I mean, he does everything for this club. We see the community involvement, and so I'm sure everybody wants to see him come back. But it is concerning, the number of times that we've seen setbacks, and yeah, it worries you in terms of what the long term might be there for him or what we might see from him. But the other two, I have full confidence in. Just because, again, we have the evidence of Lucas. The evidence is there. And then when you look at a guy like Gonzalo, I just don't, there's nothing there that I see for him that shows me anything other than a player that's truly committed to his craft. I think we can speak to a lot of the players on this team. Now, going into the travel and some of those things from the international break, yeah, it's especially for the South Americans, is difficult. We saw it a little bit last year, right, when we had the African Cup of Nations, and and seeing that from there. And there is a little bit of concern coming off from a very busy summer. I mean, there is a concern that, when I look at the amount that Hakimi was asked to play in the Olympics, and then he came right into camp right after. And so essentially for him, that season has gotten really, really long. At least some of the guys in the Euros had a little bit of a break before they came in. In Hakimi's case, he's come right in. He played a lot of minutes. I mean, Doué played some, but not as much, so I'm not as overly concerned, even though we know they're training. So it's not like just because you're not playing in a game doesn't mean you're not training. But there are some of our guys that, I believe Hakimi's going off on international duty, because I believe Morocco has a couple of games scheduled coming up here. I think it's the African Cup of Nations qualifying is what he's going back for. So He's going Olympics straight into playing for us, playing heavy minutes for us. And now he's making that trip home and playing. So there is some concern with management of that. However, I feel like football doesn't really take into consideration anymore these players. We keep adding and adding and adding. I'm one that has been probably yelling at the walls over here because this Club World Cup that we've added next summer, that's additional 2 months that's on there. And I was listening to the broadcast here this past weekend, and they were talking about how Lucho actually took into consideration next year's Club World Cup into what the club did this summer. And we had a really light summer. I mean, we played 2 friendlies. I mean, it was a relatively light summer, but they said he was actually factoring in next summer already into the amount of work that these guys are going to have to put in.
Absolutely, that is very true. I hope that maybe perhaps Hakimi and other players who were not playing in Copa America or the Euros in the summer, maybe they had a little bit of a break before the Olympics, if they then were playing at the Olympics. Hopefully there was, but of course, you have to stay quite sharp in order to play those tournaments, and I suppose those players, they do stay sharp all the time, but they might just have a few sweets and maybe a drink here or two and later evening somehow, somewhere there in the mix. Still, sort of like the last thing about the Champions League campaign. Now, I never really have a strict sort of objective, sort of minimum requirement out of our European campaign. I always tend to say I'm hoping for a good run, whatever that means, because this is a competition where you rely so much on luck as well. The small things that aren't even all in your control. Many stars will have to align, and ancestors have to smile at you, unless your name is Real Madrid. Then it's enough that the referee is smiling at you. But what's your approach in terms of hopes, dreams, and European expectations?
So last year I was accurate in that I predicted we would get to the semifinal round, and that I predicted we'd get knocked out. I will say I wasn't expecting to get knocked out by Dortmund, but nonetheless, before the season I had that. This year for me, what I want to see happen is our players are exposed to these competitive situations. I don't go into this thing with any expectation at all, because I think what we're doing right now as a club is something I've wanted this club to do for years. And that's build a true team. Build something that isn't just built around a single player or 3 players. I want players that are willing to play defense, offense, up and down the field. And I think we're going in that direction, but we're doing it with a lot of young players. So what I'm hoping comes from this campaign is that they're exposed to tough environments. They're exposed to tough situations, and that all these things are going to be great learning experiences that are going to benefit us down the road. And I know some fans might want to, no, we got to win now. And if they win now, that's great. I will certainly be cheering along with everybody else if we win right now. But I'm not going into the season with any expectation at all of, or any minimum expectation that you must do this. I think we're good enough to get top 24 and get into that group, easily get into that group. I think we're going to be competitive towards the top 8. Do we get there or not? I'm not sure. But I'm not worried about where we finish. I'm so optimistic about what the club has done and what the club is doing, that all these situations, these positions of stress, are only going to make us better. And so, hey, if we go deep, great. If we don't, I'll celebrate the things that we're in, because we will only be better for it. And then the future years, when we look back on this campaign, we'll see where all these seeds were planted. And then we're going to taste the fruits later. That's what I really think is going to happen from it. Again, I don't know how far this group goes, because you don't know. They haven't been in this situation. Most of these players haven't been there. So what happens when they're playing in a knockout game at Real Madrid, and everybody in the world wants to talk about Kylian, and all this stuff is swirling around? How do they handle that? We don't know, but they will grow from it. That's what we do know.
That is absolutely true. Let's talk a little bit about our team, such as it is after now the deadline day that was a couple of days ago last week. Still some movement out. I think as we speak, the deal is being finalized for Danilo to go to Saudi Arabia. That probably might be already finalized and announced when the episode is out, but it is one of those things that as we are speaking, it seems to be almost done deal. I'm very grateful for Danilo, what he has done for us, a true warrior, and he has all of my admiration for it. But in the end of this or during this mercato, this transfer window, we signed a backup goalkeeper, Safonov. I've gone on record before saying that I generally don't get that deal, but it is what it is. The rest of the business is far more exciting. João Neves, William Bacho, and Desiree Doué. Now, I admit I have a little bit of an issue with the current sort of demigod status of Fabrizio Romano in football journalism. is if that is even a right term, because I don't see that much journalistic integrity. I come from that side. He's more of a sort of modern content creator where these journalistic practices, best practices and good ways of doing this don't really apply on that field in the same way. But setting aside some of these grievances, he had compiled a list of top 10 underrated transfers this summer. Of course, this was done for some betting company, but on that top 10, Desiree Doué was number 10 and Jean Neves was number 1. So out of these 3 exciting players, 2 of them are actually in his top 10. My feeling also is that the new Ecuadorian defender, Pacho, is very good. I'm very impressed by his early days. And this summer was never going to be the same kind of overhaul as last summer was, I don't think. But how do you analyze the incoming talent? What kind of window we have in terms of new players that we have?
So as I mentioned to you when we were talking before we started the show, my daughter, who currently is now living and working in France, last year she was going to school in Portugal and Lisbon. And so while she is a PSG fan like her father, she was going to Benfica games because she was, their school was literally a block away. And so when I heard João Neves mentioned for us back in the summer, I was truly excited. I mean, I was like, oh, this would be amazing if we could get this guy. I was actually surprised there wasn't more people on it, to be honest. I really was. And yes, I think his addition is one of those additions that we're going to see kind of like when the club signed Bradley Barcola last year. These are additions that are just, you see it 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and you're just seeing way down the road of what these type of players can do for you. So I was extremely excited for his addition. I think he's going to be an incredible talent for us. We were hearing 2 Frenchmen being talked about a lot, and that was Doué and Akliouche. And so I was kind of leaning more towards Doué, but I think Akliouche is obviously a great player as well down at Monaco. Anytime we can add these young French, potentially upcoming stars to your roster is huge. Obviously, beating out a club like Bayern Munich for his services is kind of a cherry on top. What I like about Doué is, as we talked a little about before, is his versatility. And we saw a little bit of that in the Olympics, how Thierry Henry was using him, right? Because Thierry was using him kind of up front, and then we see him slide to the middle. So there is some versatility to his game. He's incredible. His incredible first touch skills are what really jump out to me. I mean, just the ball hits his foot, it just comes to a complete stop. It's almost kind of Neymar-esque if I kind of build up a really unfair comparison to him. But it's just, he does so much that's there. He's going to be a person that's going to get to grow inside this club. And I do think some of the business that we've done with Bradley Barcola has to have inspired him. I mean, obviously he hasn't said that, but you got to think it's inspired him because he's seen him come into our club, grow throughout the year, and then all of a sudden now he's on the national club as well and earning playing time there. So those 2 were extremely exciting. And Pacho, I'll be honest with you, I think I'm like everybody else. That came out of the blue. I mean, when it first hit, I'm like, well, I haven't heard this name. And so I didn't know anything about it. I'll be honest. When the name came up, I had to get on and start looking him up. And what I have seen from him, and I've heard some people make some Kimpembe-esque comparisons to him. I'm not, again, it's not quite fair because Kimpembe's done quite for us, and hopefully he gets to that. But I am very pleased. I'm very, very pleased with what I've seen from him. He's a physical center back. He's a composed center back. He plays the ball well. So those 3 additions are additions that I can see for the long term. They aren't those old, just, I'm going to spend a bunch of money and I know you're going to be here for a year, maybe a little bit more. Not that I didn't like the signing, but I think of when we brought in Ramos. And that was what, a year and a half. He was injured when he came in, and then I think it was, did he play for us for a full year? I think in that in that frame. So when I look at these guys, I think in the future. 2 things that didn't make sense to me that we did in this offseason. One, you mentioned Safanov. I don't understand it. I don't know exactly what we were doing there, especially for the money we spent, because we spent a lot of money there. I think it was $20 million. It was the transfer fee that we paid for him. Obviously, we saw him play a little bit in those friendlies. Again, I'm probably being overly critical. I didn't see a heck of a lot there that I was particularly impressed with. I certainly didn't see someone that's better than Aro Tenas. I didn't see that at all. So if we're spending $20 million on a guy that's a third keeper, that one doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense to me. I'm sure there's reasons that the club has. But again, for me, I don't see it. The other one that I know the club's not fond of him, but Mukiele serves such a good role for us. He is a good player. I know some people don't. He is a good player. I'm not saying he's a great player, but he's a good player that plays not only center back, he can play right back, and he can play left back. And that's the one area right now that we seem a little thin, right, on that back end. If Hakimi goes down or Nuno goes down long term, which Nuno has gone down, to me, you start to worry about where that is. And that one, I don't get it. I get maybe the profile doesn't fit what Lucho wants, and that's the things that we've heard. So I understand that. But we did nothing that I can see that replaced that. And his versatility on a club, to me, is huge. So those are the only two pieces. If I'm being really critical of our off season, if you will, is Safanov. I don't understand that one. And then, like I said, I do think Mukiele just offered us a lot, and we didn't replace that. So yeah, that's kind of what I see. I'm not sure what you saw from that, but those are the two that really jump out to me.
The story was, and I don't know to what extent it's true, but there was a story that the Safanov deal was very much because the manager agent had something to do with Kwiatek Kvaratskhelia. I don't think that it was the same person, but I think it was basically, there was a suggestion, whether rightly or wrongly, that this deal was made to buy a favor in Kvaratskhelia negotiations, which then led to nowhere anyway. So now we're just left with the non-EU, non-French, non-PSG academic goalkeeper for 20 million euros. Well, that is what it is. But you were already talking about some of the departures as well. Let's look at that list. You mentioned Mukiele, but there were quite a few players and who left, and quite a few of them also left on loan. Of course, some left also for some real money, and we'll get into that. But Juan Bernat, he was loaned to Villarreal for 1 year, and because his contract with us, once extended already, will end next summer, that means that he has played all of his PSG football for us. I do have some fond memories of Juan Bernat. I will think of him fondly. Şendur went to Besiktas, to Turkey. Mukiele just mentioned that. Bayer Leverkusen, I'm very happy that he went to a very exciting football team. I mean, there are not that many more exciting football teams in Europe to go to than Bayer Leverkusen. Of course, after the remarkable season they had last year, of course, great coach and a captain who is the goalkeeper for my national team, actually. So there's that connection. I've been following a little bit of the Leverkusen, not religiously, but a little bit because there's been a little bit of a Finnish connection where my home country. Nevertheless, okay, so then what else? Carlos Soler to West Ham, that is going to be a long-term loan, but then in the end there should be some money. Surprising amount, pretty good money for Carlos Soler. I mean, we were not expecting him to bring a great amount, but nevertheless. Renato Sanchez, that was early on in the transfer window. He went to Benfica. That was more or less part of the João Neves. I'm not quite sure if it officially was. I think it could have even officially been part of that deal. Ilias Husne to Le Havre, Gabriel Mochardo to Reims, and we hope to see him back soon, part of our squad. I would say that Mochardo and Şendur are the players who still might have career in Paris if all goes well after all of this. The rest are sort of in the middle of their long goodbyes, it seems. The actual sales, Manuel Ugarte finally got his move to Manchester United. That's 50 million euros and some bonuses, maybe up to 10 million, so it could go pretty much to that 60 million. There are not many deals in the history of PSG where we sell players for that amount of money. In actual fact, this is the second highest sale that PSG has ever done after Neymar to Saudi Arabia. So that's not nothing. This is like a proper deal that's been made, and yeah, so Manuel Ugarte, he's gone now. Hugo Ekitike, that deal was finalized to Frankfurt. That was for reported 16.5 million. And then there were a few free transfers, including Ismail Karpe to Braga and Eduard Michu to Adana Demirspor in Turkey. Sort of end of an era for one academy generation, it feels a little bit melancholic, but we keep things moving. Pretty good going all in all. And Danilo, like said, he might be imminently announced as a player for the Saudi league. Only Milan Skriniar really who wasn't sold from this list of unwanted players. What's your? I mean, it's an awful thing to say unwanted players. What's your verdict?
And one more, maybe I missed, maybe didn't mention it, but Xavi Simons.
Oh yes,
on loan, and obviously that is a potential large sale next year. I mean, you're looking at. I think we paid 15 million to buy him back, and you're figuring we could probably sell him in the 75-80 range. Some people projected higher. I mean, depending on the season he goes. Or who knows, maybe he sees what we're doing over here, he changes his mind. But he's another one that is out on loan for us as well. That
is true, yeah. You never know whether he's coming or going. He was like, he's coming from loan and going on loan in the same team. So that's his... he's actually one of those players that makes me a little bit nervous if he did come. He's a great player, amazing football player. But he gives me this sort of like entitled... vibe similar to our former number 7 a little bit. But
it does, and Lucho mentioned in a press conference probably about a month ago now, as I lose track of all time because as the season gets going, but he had mentioned wanting players that wanted to be here, and I don't. Xavi right now for me doesn't fit that. I mean, he has not fit that, and quite frankly, at this point in time, I don't view him as a piece for us in the future. He's not done anything that would make you feel that way. But what I do look at him as is a great piece of business by Nasser and Campos in the group, because bringing him back and then having the ability, I mean, if you're making 75 million and we don't know where the things are with Kylian, we don't know what the payments have got to be. So we don't know how that's impacting us in terms of the FFP that's there. So knowing that you have essentially a $75-ish million, check that you can bring in at some point in time is great. In this window, some of the things that we did not do that I think is a plus, and I kind of mentioned it before that I'm a big Gonzalo Ramos fan. I'm really glad that we resisted adding Osimhen. I'm really glad that we resisted adding Lookman right now. I didn't really view those two players as long-term pieces to the puzzle. Yeah, if we have an injury situation that pops up, obviously it would be nice to have them. But I didn't get the sense that they would be great fits. So resisting there and staying within the focus of what we have, I think is great within the framework of this team. But I think it's also great because now we're going to give, and it's not a lot of time. If Gonzalo comes back in mid-November, it's not a lot of time, but he's got a chance to get back on the field and do those things that, quite frankly, I think he can do. I think he showed those flashes last year. In games that he played, but Kylian wasn't in the lineup. When Kylian was in the lineup, it just didn't work. Everything had to go through Kylian, right? I mean, that was just the nature of having him out on the field. Players are looking for him. What we've seen this year is the ball moves around. Nobody's the end spot. The ball has to stop here before, and it doesn't work that way with this club. At least it hasn't through the 3 games that we've watched. People are moving the ball around. We're seeing various different goal scorers. So not bringing on Osimhen, not bringing on Lookman, I just think this is great news for a person like Gonzalo Ramos. I think it's great news for someone like Bradley Barcola that we're saying, hey, we are now going to put you out there. Because and I don't know if it was actually true, but it was something that was reported that Lucho had said that he saw Barcola coming into this year as a super backup, a super reserve. And I don't know if he said that or not. Who knows? There's so much things that are out there. I know when I saw it, it's like, you got to be crazy. Like, you got to keep Bradley in this lineup. He's got to get these minutes because the ceiling is so high. And I think we're seeing that now. So I really like the fact that we resisted that. Now, some of it could have been financial. We don't know. Maybe there is those things of what is Kylian's payment doing to us in terms of financial fair play if we have to pay him that money. Is he giving us any money back? So maybe some of that factor into it. But when I look at this transfer window, some of the things we did not do are as important as some of the things we did do. And so everything combined for this, like I said, outside of maybe having a little bit of help on our wings, I really think we've done a great job. I really do. I think we've made this club better right now and it's immediate, but I think we've made it exponentially better for the future.
Absolutely, and we're gonna get to that Kylian Mbappe's exit plan in a short second. But before that, I wanted to finish this transfer window conversation, because to me this Manuel Ugarte deal now is actually quite interesting, because you could say that he was brought in. He played for a year. Essentially, he didn't he was in the squad for a year, but he was playing. It was more checkered, but he started well, and he was there for one season. But he was bought as a young, promising player. He wasn't cheap, and things started well, but then they didn't work out. And now that we are selling him, we're basically more or less getting the money back that was initially invested in him. So it was a kind of like a tryout for a year, for nothing venture, nothing gain. Before, we have had these players, like for instance Milan Skriniar is now a great example, come in as a free transfer, and people always talk about these free transfers like they're the solution to everything and it's so great. But this has happened to us before. Now they are having usually higher salary than maybe in normal circumstances they would, because there's no transfer fee. And then if things don't work out like they sometimes don't, like with Milan Skriniar, for instance, you are stuck. You are very, very stuck. And if he doesn't want to go to Saudi Arabia, which he has every right not to want to go there. If he doesn't want to go there, then he doesn't have to go there. But there's no way for him to find, except if you can find him like a loan deal where we pay like 70% of the salary, or something along those lines anyway. So I feel like there is a sort of like happening this change where the club is no longer looking at like who is the biggest name that we can get as a free transfer, and rather looking like who are these young players that we can, even if it works. Basically, Hugo Ekitike could have been the same thing. The only problem with that is that we blackballed him. We just basically benched him and didn't give him the chance. If we would have given him a little bit of a chance and not done that, I think we would have also been able to get the amount of, because he's doing wonderfully well now in Bundesliga. Do you see this is a change that is happening with PSG?
Yeah, absolutely. And one that, quite frankly, I didn't know if I would ever see. With QSI and the money and the things that are there, I mean, they had the ability to keep building teams if they really wanted to, similar to the M&M type teams. So this change in mindset is hugely refreshing. So I like the direction. It sounds like Lucho is close, or there's extensive talks about him staying on longer. I think that's great for this project. Keeping Campos here is great for this project, because the synergy between the two seems to be very, very good, at least from everything we see. So yeah, I think I like the direction. I'm excited about the direction. We'll see as we get into those positions of stress. Do we then tend to revert back to who we were? If we're not doing everything right now, do we still see this project through? I guess we'll just have to wait and see, because your guess would be as good as mine. I mean, because it's easy to go back into the ways that you're comfortable with. I just hope we stick it out. I really see something really, really special happening here if they do.
This was my concern. You were talking earlier about like Victor Osimhen. Jadon Sancho was another player, and I felt like these are the kind of players that they come in and they are expected to start. They are like expected to be starters. Anybody who you pay so much money for, they are expected to be starters. Kvaratskhelia would have also been one of those players, and we have players for all those positions. So I feel very protective about the balance of our squad, and to say that I don't want Bradley Barcola to be a second choice. I don't want Gonzalo Ramos to be a second choice, just like you've been talking about. So there's that. But let's get into this other thing that you already have mentioned a little bit, because some people, of course, as always, were a little bit disappointed, and let's face it, that will always happen. But even with the savings made with the Mbappé salary that no longer has to be paid, and there's some reasonable incoming transfer fees, although some of them are only coming in later on, it could have been seen as something that could have brought more players or more famous players or both coming in. We were talking about these players already now, like Victor Osimhen, Jadon Sancho, Kvicha Kvaratskhelia and such. And there's been talk about these players throughout this summer, but many people, I think, overlook the fact that you mentioned a few times. PSG is still currently in negotiations and the final exit deal for Kylian Mbappé. As far as I gather, the implications of this departure aren't quite clear yet. We don't really know how those things are going to impact the finances and financial fair play situation, because there were all sorts of bonuses, loyalty bonuses, and all sorts of things that he was, or somebody was talking about, that he would perhaps give up some of those in order to leave PSG in financially less compromised position. And let me be clear, of course, Kylian Mbappé has every right to do what he did, to leave on a free. Contract was end, and the contract was given to him by the club. It was the choice of the club had made. I assume it was made by Nasser Al-Khelaifi, probably with the blessing from Doha, the go-ahead from Doha. So the contract that was given to Kylian Mbappé was absolutely huge. You could say that it was a mistake. That's hindsight is 2020, but it was not an accident. That's what it was. It was not an accident. Now, last summer, 1 year ago, even a little bit over 1 year ago, Mbappé had informed the club that he will not extend, but he will insist on playing the last season, essentially kind of like refusing to be sold, leaving for free, which you and I, we can all have our own theories to what extent it was done in cahoots with Real Madrid, to whom this seems to be like a strategy, which of course works very well for them because they have quite a pull. But considering that, and now we don't know the facts as they are, not all of them anyways, but based on this that we know, and that Mbappé insisted on leaving for free and not to be sold, and now there seems to be issue with these finances, I thought that they would have been clear. I thought that they would have been talked out far further than they apparently were. Does this impact your opinion about of him? Because I have a feeling like he did play us, the club, a little bit, and I know it's just a business. I don't even want to spend too much time talking about him because we have a very exciting project in our hands. But in hindsight, how do you look at this Mbappé situation? What's your last analysis of it?
So I'm a huge Kylian Mbappé fan. I really have always been so. However, his departure from the club for me was needed. If not now, it could have even been probably earlier. What I always go back to, and when you were talking, I had to look it up on my phone just to make sure I was looking at it correctly. But if you remember when they announced that extension, he stood out there, at the Parc des Princes pitch up on the stage, and he held up a jersey that said 2025. And then shortly after, we learned, oh no, it's 2024. And I never got past the point of, well, then why did you stand up there with a jersey that had 2025 on it? Why didn't it say 2024? If you knew that this contract was there, if you had that idea, and we heard very shortly after he signed that he was already having second thoughts, why did he get up on the stage that day with a jersey that said 2025? Why didn't he say, no, it's got to say 2024? Because then that would have been more accurate. It would have been more accurate for the fans. It would have been more accurate for the complete setting. So going into that, yeah, I do feel like there was probably a little bit of duplicity going on in there in terms of what was being said and maybe what was being, I don't know, thought about behind that. I've learned from a lot of people I've talked to, the Mbappés are very, very business savvy folks, from his mom to his father and the whole group. So it's disappointing the way it went down. With all that being said, he holds the cards in this situation, because if there's nothing written contract-wise, he's going to get his money. I mean, that's at least from my background working in obviously North American sports, probably different from how these things are run over there, but a contract's a contract. And so holding payment, not making payment, PSG may not want to make that payment, but ultimately to me, it doesn't matter what you verbally might have talked about. It's all going to come down to what to me would be in writing. So I, for one, want this topic to go away. I was saying this past weekend, and here on our broadcast, which is what we get here in the United States from being is the English League On broadcast. So it's the League On broadcasters that we have over here. And so it started right off the bat, and he mentioned Kylian Mbappé not playing for the team. And I said to my wife, I go, what's the first game this year we're going to get to watch PSG where we don't hear Kylian Mbappe's name mentioned? Because I said, I'm really looking forward to that day. And again, I hope he does well for Real Madrid. It'll be obviously not against us, but I hope he does well for France. I don't really much care at this point in time. But for the club, they need to wrap this chapter up. But I do think, I do think he played us. I think he played the club. And unfortunately, if the club ends up paying all this money out, it's the club that in the end loses for it. And sure, we got results from him. That's one thing that we cannot, there are results there. We can argue if the results were enough, but there are results that he gave us. But it's a chapter that needs to be closed sooner than later.
I really agree, and like I said, I don't even want to. I think it is something that we need to wrap up as not just like now in this episode, but in general. Like this is something that has been now, and fortunately for us, of course, as you were mentioning, all of this Xavi Simons situation is going to be a little bit of a help, and that might actually bail us out. Well, I mean, I'm talking about it like it's my money, but you know what I mean. So hopefully it's going to all be sorted a little bit down the line. But I share your feeling. I think we were being played by him a little bit, and there's a chance that he will pay some kind of a price PR wise or in his general image in Paris or not, because he had the ultras on his side as well. So it is what it is. C'est comme ça, as the French themselves would say. We don't have to get too much into detail about the Lille match, which was played last night as we're recording this now on Monday, my evening, and your not quite noon, but getting there. Nice victory for PSG. Goals by Vitinha from the penalty spot. Barcola once again from his left flank, and finally Randall Colomani scored a headed goal with a fair amount of determination from a great, actually really great assist by Desiree Doué. Really exciting. It was the type of goal that I saw Randall Colomani scoring quite a few times for Nantes earlier in his career when he was playing there before going to Bundesliga. A lot of excitement there, but one player is talked about more than others, and that's Bradley Barcola. 4 goals in first 3 matches, and just very high level of performance all around. He's still a young man. Actually, today as we record, he's celebrating his 22nd birthday. He seems to be very level-headed. There was a feature on him on Telefoot in France, and this is what he said. Whether someone tells me you are the strongest or worst, it honestly doesn't change anything. I'm always working. That's my personality. I don't necessarily talk, but I'm always fighting. Seems like a pretty good mentality. The type of mentality I really believe very firmly that we need. 1 year ago, the same level of expectations that now is on Barcola was on the shoulders of Warren Emery. Now, you've been working with young athletes, you've been working with the professional sports and athletes. What is needed for someone like Bradley Barcola to not struggle under this press? I think that with Warren Emery, there was also an injury and all sorts, but it wasn't quite even handled, which happens to young players anyway. What would be your advice for Bradley Barcola?
Patience, really. I mean, these are still young athletes. I mean, that we have on this roster, and he's come out like a house of fire to start this season. Sure, it would be great if he did this through 50 matches, but the chances of him doing that, I mean, again, he's still younger in his career. He's still going to experience these bumps in the road. So I think for us more so than for him, it's just to maybe rein in the expectations of what he's going to be this year. I mean, people are like, oh, he's got more goals than Kylian Mbappé. Nah, hold on. Just you got to allow this kid to develop. And while things are going great, same thing with Warren. It'll be the same thing with Doué. All these players, we're gonna have to give them the opportunity to grow and also give them the opportunity to struggle. And the first moments that they struggle, that's the time for the club and that's the time for the player to work through those struggles. It's not like, oh, gosh, we should have signed Lookman after all. No, that's not what we're doing here. So those times are going to come. But what I saw from him, and going back to the game, and I don't want to go into too much detail, is there was a play in the second half where he tracked back on a ball, and it was probably midway through that, where he tracked back and got the ball off the defender. And I was like, man, he just came up the field. Like, he just flew up the field to make that play. That's so refreshing to see, because that shows you the tenacity of this kid. And actually, we saw it a little bit later on when Seti came in. Seti came in and made a great play coming back on a ball and getting the ball from a guy. So that's the mentality that you're going to see. What's exciting about this group, and this is just my opinion. For those that disagree, it's perfectly fine. I understand that. But what you're going to see from this group throughout the year is there's going to be different times during the season where different players are performing at that highest level. So right now, it might be Bradley's performing at that really high level. Well, then it might be when Gonzalo comes back. He's that one that's kind of carrying the team. In the midfield, it might be Neves that's carrying the midfield, and maybe Warren's not playing as well. And then all of a sudden, it's going to be Warren for a stretch that's going to be playing well and carrying that. That's the beauty of when you have a team and you don't have individuals, because the team itself is going to continue to function along. It's the team function. It's the players that will be playing well, and the ones that don't, that pick each other up, that we're going to see moving forward. So for me, when I look at Bradley, I fully expect we're going to see some stretches in there where there's just going to be a handful of games where he's not going to look like he's at his finest, because he's developing, he's growing into this. But the fruits of this down the road are going to be so much better. And I watched a lot of Major League Baseball players come up, and they'll get on these 10-game hitting streaks, and the ball's going all over the yard, and people say, oh my God, this guy is the greatest thing in the world, and the next thing they're not, and then people jump off the bandwagon, and it's like, oh, we've got to get rid of this guy and replace him, only to know that they come back around. We know what these players can do because we've seen it. So it's just a matter of the more they play, the more consistency that they're going to have.
Absolutely, that is thing, and I think that the one sort of recurring theme when we're talking about today, and you've been talking about the season, is this collective. It's this collective that we are having at the moment, and it's on a high level, and it's quite interesting because both of us, we've almost kind of talked about even some of the players, great players, world-class players even, but almost kind of like safeguarding the collective that we have, and not wanting to necessarily mix. Like, I'm okay if Dembele is like the biggest star we have. Or who would it be? Maybe Donnarumma. I don't know who is the biggest star of PSG. Maybe it is Dembele. Maybe Barcola will be, but because Dembele was playing for Barcelona and whatever. So the people who don't just watch French football or don't watch it at all, they are more familiar with these players. Is it that then, or something else that to you? What is the most exciting thing to you about the season that you're looking forward to? What would be the main thing that you're excited about?
Just the freshness of this squad. It all feels so new. It's just, every game we have approached, even when I watched some of those friendlies and we had those weird lineups, but each game I'm so excited to see what these players are going to do today. And even during moments, we saw moments during the Lille match. I mean, Lille very easily could have either got a draw out of that, or they could have beaten us. I mean, quite frankly, they had opportunities. I mean, I think they had 4 big chances. I think they missed them all when I looked at the foot mob stats afterwards. But what I look at, I'm just so excited to watch these guys play. And they do so many great things on there. And so what I see in my eyes, and I've been fortunate enough to be around some Major League Baseball teams where we had some really young teams, and you'd sit there and you'd watch them and you're like, okay, you might not get us this year, but boy, come next year, look out. We're coming, because you could just see it coming. And that's what I see with this group. And so for me, it's just the freshness. And also, and it's nothing against the M&M group. I was so tired of the drama. Every single match, it was something. It just, is Neymar mad at Mbappé? Mbappe's taking shots or whatever. Messi. It was always something. It seemed like it was going on. And it always took away from the joy of watching a football match. And to me, right now, we have a joy. And it just seems like this team is playing together. It seems like they're having fun. So, yeah, I was kind of bummed that the international break came up, because I'm like, now we got to wait 2 more weeks to see this group play again, because I'm just really excited to see it. I think Liga is going to be very competitive this year. I think some squads are doing some really nice things. So I'm excited to see how this plays out. But I think we're going to have this is going to be a lot of fun. And so I hope everybody approaches it in enjoying what we're going to do. I do still think we're going to get results. I'm not saying we're going to be, a terrible team. We're going to get results. We have the talent that's out there. But just watch these kids grow. Just watch them grow. And we did a little bit with Vitinha, right? We saw a huge jump for Vitinha. Well, just imagine what Doué's doing this year. Imagine what he'll do next year.
That's the thing. There's certainly what feels like infinite potential, and there's a chance that things will turn against us. You never know, but that's a risk that you take when you dedicate so much of your energy to a football club that is not in your control anyway. Thank you so much, Mike. It's been really great to have you on PSG Review.
Thank you very much. It's been a great time.
That was Mike McNally, a PSG fan and a professional in sports business. Safe to say, he knows what he's talking about. PSG women's team here celebrating the win in the preseason tournament in Perth, Australia. It's true that these types of tournaments are meaningless in that they don't really count as real trophies, but it's better to win than to lose them if you are going to make it all the way there to the other side of the planet. A lot of rotation in the squad, and the second match, which was a final in a manner of speaking, at least it was against Manchester City, and we saw Kate, probably the most dedicated player to the club badge, men or women's side, who isn't from the academy. That's our Polish goalkeeper, Katarina Kierczynek, and she had an amazing match. Really phenomenal. One of the best matches displays as a goalkeeper that I've really seen in a very long time, certainly in our women's team. She might find herself as a backup to Mary Earps, but what a backup she is. I imagine probably the best backup, the kind of situation like when we had Keylor Navas as a backup in the men's team. There is one more friendly left in France before the season starts, and the transfer window closes on September 19th, so still some time to get the reinforcements. And I will have to say this. When we played against Manchester City, I'm pretty confident that we were the better team on the pitch, even though they had many good opportunities, but it's just that our goalkeeper was really great. But when all the best players are on the pitch at the same time, I think PSG is easily a better team. That's my opinion. But their bench was quite a lot deeper, so some work is left to be done by Sabrina Delanoy and Angelo Castellazzi, who are in charge of the squad. We do need some depth and reinforcements, things like that, because what can easily happen is that there's one or two injuries, suspension in a bad place, things like that, and all of a sudden we are sort of left struggling again and might have to compromise the whole season a little bit because we are lacking some players who are on that level where we need our players to be. But nevertheless, it's a great place to be for the women's team also. Cannot complain too much as they are flying back to Paris with a trophy from Australia. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks again to Mike McNally for sharing his insights with us today. Much appreciated. Find me and the show on Twitter at PSG Review Pod and at PSG Review on TikTok as well as on Instagram. It's an international break now. I can only hope for no injuries and that no one exhausts themselves too much. I suppose we need to keep the momentum the post-break as well. It has been a great start for the season. My name is Mikko. More PSG Review next time, but until then, peace.